What if helping a stranger led you to uncover the biggest lie of your life? Claire switched off her smartphone and let her eyes wander to the view outside the window. Beyond her sprawling American ranch-style home stretched a thick, breathtaking fir forest. "Who was on the phone just now?" Her mother's sharp, demanding voice came from behind. "Eric," Claire replied casually. "He's invited me to a restaurant tomorrow evening. Says there's something important he wants to discuss." Margaret Sinclair instantly started hovering around her daughter, eager to extract every possible detail. But Claire wasn't in the mood to talk much about her fiancé. "I just don't get you," her mother said, settling onto the sofa across from her. "Ever since Eric proposed, you've been so downcast. This is supposed to be a happy time. You're getting married soon." Claire only let out a sigh at her mother's words. "Mom, please, not this again," she said, tugging impatiently at the sleeve of her blouse. "You know as well as I do that what we have isn't really a love story. It's more like a merger between two companies. He doesn't even hide the fact that I'm simply the most strategic choice for him." Margaret Sinclair pushed her designer glasses up the bridge of her nose and shot her daughter a questioning look. "So what? Why should it matter what he thinks of you?" her mother shot back. "The important thing is that Eric proposed. How is that a bad thing?" Noticing her daughter's skeptical expression, she went on, shaking her head with a tone of authority. Yes, I know. You had men who were wealthier, better looking, more impressive. But let me remind you, at 34, even the richest bride starts losing her value in the eyes of suitors." Margaret Sinclair softly took her daughter's hand and added, "I'm not saying this to be cruel, but because I want to help you, to guide you, as any mother would. You need to grab this opportunity while you can, or you'll end up a lonely steel magnolia, with neither a husband nor children." Claire gave her mother a sorrowful look. "Maybe you're right. Eric is considered a promising businessman. He says his company is planning a major expansion next year. Well, there you go. What am I even hesitating for? He's a great guy. Done deal. I'll take him," her mother joked with a laugh. "Just believe me, once the wedding is over, all those doubts of yours will fade away like smoke. You two simply won't have the time to worry about such things. You'll be merging your businesses, splitting responsibilities, and the workload will never seem to end. And before you even realize it, you'll have children of your own." Claire gave her mother a faint smile and gently ran her hand over hers. "All right, I'm exhausted. I'm heading to bed. I have an early morning tomorrow." After wishing her mother good night and placing a soft kiss on her cheek, Claire went upstairs to her room. Yet, no matter how she tried, she couldn't manage to fall asleep peacefully. She let out a heavy sigh and flipped onto her other side for what felt like the 10th time, her mind circling around how complicated life had become since her father passed away 4 years ago from a sudden stroke. He had been one of the city's most powerful businessmen, and when he died, he left behind a significant fortune for his wife and daughter. According to his will, a portion of that inheritance had to be invested into business ventures by Claire. Luckily, that part wasn't a problem for her. By then, she was already busy building and expanding her own chain of boutique stores specializing in women's fashion. With the extra financial boost, her business quickly rose above the competition. Young, stunning, and accomplished, Claire truly embodied all of it, and she enjoyed every perk that came with such a life. Naturally, she drew the attention of the city's most eligible bachelors, the so-called golden youth. But Claire wasn't in any rush to settle down, and soon the gossip mills started spinning. Some claimed she had overly modern views on a woman's place in society, and that family life wasn't anywhere near the top of her priorities. The outcome was that men were practically absent from her life. Most were either intimidated by her or assumed she simply wasn't interested in any kind of relationship. Eric was the only one who dared to break that pattern. At a charity event, he confidently approached her and, without any hesitation, asked her out on a date. "I couldn't care less about what everyone else thinks," he told her later. "I'm a man who knows exactly what he wants. I'm looking to build a family with a woman who can be not just a loyal, dependable partner in life, but also someone I can fully trust in business. Those flashy piranhas shouldn't be criticizing you. They should be learning from your example. Most of them haven't achieved anything on their own and just burned through their husband's money." Claire figured that this was his way of showing her both his confidence and determination. But everything shifted that night at the restaurant when he suddenly suggested they split the bill. She agreed, of course. There was no reason to make a scene over a simple dinner. Still, in that moment, she couldn't help but question for the first time whether it was even worth continuing to see this man. Then Margaret Sinclair stepped into the picture. As soon as her mother found out that Claire had a wealthy suitor, she began applying moral pressure, warning her about a lonely, childless old age. Claire eventually gave in. She simply couldn't take the pressure anymore. So when Eric proposed a couple of months later, she accepted, though without any real excitement. At their engagement party, Claire couldn't shake an unsettling feeling. Eric paraded her in front of his relatives as if she were some rare, ridiculously expensive luxury car rather than a living, breathing woman. Instead of speaking about her character or personality, the young businessman bragged about her achievements and even tried to estimate the projected profits of her company for the next quarter. As Eric went on about money and their upcoming business merger, Claire felt a wave of nausea creeping up her throat. The more he spoke, the less certain she was about wanting to marry him. "Honey, you're not touching your food. Are you all right?" he asked, glancing at her with concern while neatly adjusting the napkin on his lap. The following evening, he and Claire were seated at a table in one of the city's most luxurious and elegantly decorated restaurants. Getting a table here was only possible with an advance reservation. "I'm fine," Claire lied, though in truth, she had no appetite. It had been an exhausting day. She'd had to audit 3 boutiques in one go. She glanced helplessly at the beautifully arranged dishes set before her. Eric had ordered an extravagant fish dish along with a large platter of fresh seafood. Normally, Claire would have enjoyed such a dinner, but tonight she felt unbearably uncomfortable. A heavy mix of anxiety and doubts about their future together weighed on her. She wanted to ask him what he imagined their marriage would look like, whether he planned on having children soon, and what he thought about the new house she had her heart set on buying. But before she could get a word out, the long tablecloth that draped all the way to the floor gave a sudden tug, followed by a faint whisper from underneath. "Auntie, if you're not going to eat that, can I have your portion?" Claire froze in place, completely stunned. At first, she honestly thought she was imagining it. But then, something kept tugging at the hem of her long dress, and that same thin voice pleaded softly. "I'll be quiet, I promise. No one will even notice me, please." Claire slowly lifted her gaze toward the groom, but he was too busy devouring his quail, completely unaware of anything happening around him. "Eric, did you hear that?" Claire's heart started pounding faster. She was almost afraid to glance down. "I heard that," she began, but her fiancé just stared at her blankly, still chewing on the bird with those strong, unbothered jaws of his. Without thinking, Claire's fingers tugged at the edge of the tablecloth. When she lifted it, she was stunned to discover a small, frail boy, maybe 8 years old, sitting quietly beneath the table, clearly waiting for a bit of food. His large, pale gray eyes were filled with hunger that seemed almost frozen in place. Yet somehow, a flicker of hope still lingered in him. "Oh my God, my baby!" Claire gasped, overwhelmed with shock. "How did you get in here?" she asked. The boy's eyes darted nervously between her and her fiancé. Eric set his fork down and fixed the child with a hard stare. What's this all about, huh? You've been hiding here this whole time? He said sharply. Speak up. Every word. The irritation in Eric's voice only grew more intense. Claire quickly raised a hand, motioning for him to ease up a bit. Don't shout like that, she said gently. I'm sure there's a reason for all this. Just then, a young woman stepped into the hallway, thin and worn looking like the boy, dressed in a faded blue cleaning uniform. Ben! There you are. Aren't you ashamed of yourself? She cried, rushing over to the frightened child. I'm so sorry, she said, turning to Claire and her fiancé. I only left him in the kitchen for a minute, and he somehow ended up in here. He's your son, isn't he? Claire asked gently. The woman gave a small nod, and Claire added, He was so hungry. He just wanted to share some food. Flushed with embarrassment, the cleaning lady grabbed Ben's hand and gently pulled the reluctant boy out from beneath the table. Her voice trembled, heavy with barely held back tears. I'm so sorry, she said again. I honestly don't know what made him think this was okay. She shot the boy a pointed glance, one that clearly said, We'll be having a talk about this later. I do feed him, of course, she went on. But the wages here are really low. What little I make barely covers the rent and the essentials. Buckwheat pasta, the cheapest stuff I can get, she said. Not much in the way of vegetables either. And here, with all these smells and all this food everywhere, he just couldn't help himself. Overwhelmed by the shame of the situation, the cleaning lady turned her eyes away from Claire. But Claire didn't see anything disgraceful in it. As she looked at the exhausted mother, clearly someone who probably worked endless shifts in this over-the-top restaurant for next to nothing, she was struck by a sudden wave of compassion for both her and her little boy. Deeply moved by the woman's hardship, Clary quickly motioned for the waiter. When he came over, she quietly asked him to pack up her meal and give it to the cleaning lady. Oh no, please don't, the woman said, her eyes brimming with tears. She clutched her son's hand even tighter, as if afraid he might suddenly dash off to the kitchen in desperation. Hey, it's really no big deal, Claire said gently. At least this way, you'll both get a proper meal. When did you last have something to eat? Claire asked. The cleaning lady blushed once more, then shifted her gaze toward the window, avoiding the question. Claire understood immediately. The mother was clearly going without so her son wouldn't have to. I figured as much, she said with a quiet nod. She glanced at the menu again and ordered SEL or L more filling dishes. Then she asked for everything to be packed up to go, directing the gesture toward the pale, almost ghost-like woman standing before her. You know you can't keep doing this to yourself, Claire said gently, shaking her head at the mother's quiet resistance. If you're not taking care of yourself, then who's going to take care of your son? Claire asked softly. Tears began streaming down the cook's cheeks. Meanwhile, little Ben was watching the kitchen intently, his eyes following the waiters and cooks as they wrapped up leftovers for the day. All right, sweetheart, I think you're going a bit overboard now, Eric said suddenly, having been quietly standing nearby the whole time. His face had taken on a shade of red, clearly irritated. Sensing the tension, the cleaning lady quickly spoke up. We should get going, she said awkwardly. We don't want to cause any trouble. A simple sorry isn't going to cut it. The groom barked, grabbing the cleaning lady roughly by the arm. Eric, have you lost your mind? What are you doing? Claire exclaimed, horrified. But Eric didn't ease up. His grip was firm, almost cruel, and he glared at the little boy with a look that bordered on contempt. What's wrong with you, Claire? He snapped, his voice rising as he practically spat the words. They played you for a fool. Took advantage of your kindness. What? Did you think we'd just feed strangers on our dime? Let them go. Right now. Claire shouted, burning with embarrassment over her fiancé's coldness and completely uncalled for anger. "I paid for that food, and just a reminder, we're not married yet," Eric snapped. Claire's eyes flared with anger. Without hesitation, she pried the cleaning lady and the sobbing Ben out of his grasp, and the two quickly retreated into the pantry. "What is wrong with you?" he kept shouting after them. "We should call security and toss these scammers out. People like that don't just mooch off soft-hearted folks like you. They ruin the experience for everyone else." Claire simply shook her head, her expression full of disappointment as she looked at him. "Eric, I can't believe this is coming from you. Are you really lashing out at a struggling mother and her child?" Claire said, her voice tight with disbelief. "It's obvious they're barely getting by. How can you be so heartless? And how can you be so completely naive?" Eric shot back. "If you keep this up, our business won't last a month. You'll be throwing money at every sob story that comes along." He stared hard at his stunned fiancée. "What are you even doing?" she whispered, hurt and outraged. But the man simply raised a hand dismissively. "Thanks, I'm stuffed," he said, pushing his chair back as he stood to leave. "When you're ready to live a normal life with me and quit pretending you're some kind of Mother Teresa, give me a call." With that, Eric walked out of the restaurant, drawing the stares of Eleanor L. curious onlookers. As usual, he didn't bother settling the bill on his way out. His stinginess had a way of showing itself, even in the smallest things. At first, they used to split the bill, but over time, he just started letting her cover everything. "Figures," she muttered to herself with a tired sigh as she reached for her wallet. After witnessing her fiancé's appalling behavior, there was no way she could just sit there. And she definitely couldn't leave without saying something to the cleaning lady. So, she made up her mind to go find her and offer a hand. Besides, she'd noticed the work schedule taped to the kitchen wall, and it looked like the poor woman's shift was just about over. "Grace, is that your name?" Claire asked softly as she stepped into the office. She'd seen it on the schedule earlier, and now looked at the frail, willowy woman who blinked in surprise, clearly startled. "What more do you want from me?" Grace asked nervously. "If you're here to ask for money, I don't have any. But I swear, I didn't take anything. I'll pay you back if I have to." No, that's not it at all," Claire said quickly, trying to calm her. "I just wanted to say how sorry I am that you had to experience my fiancé's selfishness. Please forgive me. I feel so embarrassed," Claire said, her voice low with regret. Grace eyed her cautiously at first, but then, after a moment's thought, gave a small nod. "It's all right," she said. "You gave us dinner for tonight, and even lunch for tomorrow. How could we possibly be upset with you?" As she helped Ben into his coat, the boy glanced up at Claire with a soft smile. "All right, wait for me by the service entrance, and don't wander off," Grace told him gently, giving his shoulder a light pat. Ben turned to Claire, thanked her sincerely, and with a cheerful goodbye, dashed out into the street. Blushing once more, the cleaning lady slowly walked up to Claire, her words coming out haltingly, like each one took real effort to say. "You probably think I'm a terrible mother," she murmured. "Maybe I am, but I'm doing everything I possibly can for my son." Grace drew in a deep breath and then let it out in a sharp exhale. Ben's had a heart condition since he was little. It's serious and dangerously unpredictable. It takes a lot of money to manage his condition, Grace said quietly, and we just don't have it. I've been trying to juggle a couple extra jobs, but it barely makes a dent. It's like throwing a drop into the ocean. Claire's face tightened in concern as she listened. "What about state-funded treatment?" she asked. "Aren't they helping at all?" "Oh no, it's not that," Grace replied quickly, shaking her head. "We're on the waiting list for a free operation. There's a quota system, but the line is incredibly long. She buried her face in her hands, overwhelmed. And it's not just the surgery, she added. It's the recovery afterward. The post-op therapy is just as critical. Rehabilitation costs a lot, Grace said softly. And not all of Ben's medications are covered. Some of them we can only get if we pay out of pocket. She looked at Claire, her lips trembling as silent tears welled up. But don't worry, she whispered. I'll figure it out, even if it means working non-stop. 10 jobs if I have to. We might not have the luxury of waiting, she added. His condition is getting worse too fast. Ben's already pale as a ghost, and I'm terrified for him. Grace couldn't hold it in any longer. She broke down in tears. There's no one I can talk to about this, she said between sobs. No one to lean on. It's just so hard. I'm sorry, she added quickly, wiping her face. I shouldn't be dumping all this on you. Her shoulders trembled as she cried, unable to stop. Please don't cry, Claire said gently, trying to soothe her. I know it's overwhelming, but tears won't change anything. They'll only drain you more. And your son needs you strong. And most of all, healthy. Unsure what else to do, Claire reached out and softly rubbed her back, hoping to offer some small comfort. Claire could see just how dire Lydia's situation really was. And now, everything hinged on how fast the money could be raised. A sudden rush of emotion gripped her chest, an urgent mix of empathy and determination. Driven by compassion, she made a decision that, to her, felt like the only right thing to do. Listen, she said, reaching into her purse and pulling out a substantial checkbook. Just tell me how much the surgery costs. I'll help you cover it. Grace, overwhelmed and teary-eyed, stared at Claire in disbelief. When her eyes landed on the checkbook, she immediately pulled back, as if it were something burning hot instead of paper. No, I can't, she said, shaking her head firmly. You absolutely mustn't. I could never accept something like that. I'd never be able to repay you. Who said anything about a loan? Claire replied calmly. You don't owe me a thing. I'm doing this for your son, for Ben. So he has a chance to live, you understand? Think of it as my way of giving back, she added gently. A personal act of charity. Claire gave a small shrug and looked at Grace, waiting patiently for her to say the number. She was ready to write the check the moment the amount was spoken. After a few moments, Grace gathered herself enough to speak, finally naming the sum that would cover the operation and the initial phase of post-surgery treatment. Oh my God, I don't even have the words to thank you, she said, her voice trembling with relief. Tears welled in her eyes as she pressed her thin hands to her chest, clutching the one chance she had to save her son's life. Would it be all right if I came to visit you and Ben sometimes? Claire asked, catching Grace a bit off guard. I'd really like to keep helping however I can. Grace looked down, clearly unsure, but eventually nodded. She figured, after all, there was no harm in it, and maybe even a little good. But the next evening, when Claire went to see Eric in hopes of making peace, she was met with a furious outburst. What do you mean you gave the money to the cleaning lady? He yelled. Margaret Sinclair had once again urged Claire to try and be patient, to understand that her fiancé might be struggling to accept her overwhelming generosity at the restaurant. The food there wasn't cheap, you know. Do you even realize what that woman was doing? Eric shot her a look filled with anger, confusion, and clear disapproval, all tangled together. Without another word, he poured himself a stiff drink, knocked it back in one gulp, and wiped his mouth with the sleeve of his freshly pressed shirt. It doesn't matter what Grace does for work, Claire said firmly, shaking her head. She and her son were in a desperate situation. I couldn't just turn my back on them, Claire said firmly. Oh, this is unreal, Eric muttered, shaking his head. Did it ever cross your mind that the whole heart condition story might be a con? That they played you just to get your money? What's so hard to believe? Claire replied, keeping her voice steady. No, I'm telling you. Grace was completely genuine with me. I would have sensed it if she were lying. Still, beneath her calm tone, she could feel her patience slipping, the very patience she'd spent all of yesterday building up in hopes of making peace with Eric. Instead of focusing on yourself, on your own future, you're throwing money at total strangers, he said, wagging a finger at her. Laya, you're burning through serious cash on people you barely know. Fine. That's your choice. But even if you don't care about your own money, could you at least think about me for once? What's going on with you? Claire asked, looking at him with quiet disbelief. Dalton dropped his head into his hands. What's going on with me? He echoed, almost to himself. Did you forget you promised to help me get my business off the ground? Eric said, frustration creeping into his voice. We were supposed to build something together, and now it sounds like you can't invest at all because you've spent everything. Claire bit her lip, realizing with a pang that she had made that promise to contribute a significant sum once Eric showed her his first plan. The business was tied to construction, and he'd been counting on her support to help him launch his own commercial center. I'm sorry, she murmured, eyes downcast. But maybe we can just delay the construction a bit. I should have enough saved up by then. Eric let out a cold, sarcastic laugh. Well, that's just great. I'm thrilled, he said with a sneer. He poured himself another drink and knocked it back so fast that Claire couldn't help but notice. It wasn't his first time handling liquor like that. If this is how he deals with stress now, she wondered, what's it going to be like if we actually get married? I don't have anything else to say to you, she said with a shrug. I've made my decision, Claire said firmly. I want that little boy to have a chance at getting better. And if you can't accept that, then I don't see how we move forward. What? The young businessman snapped, glaring at her. You heard me, she said, lifting her chin with quiet defiance. It's clear this relationship is going nowhere. We're just too different. I can't marry someone who only thinks about himself and his bank account. That was the final straw for Eric. He exploded into a loud stream of curses, most of them, unsurprisingly, aimed squarely at Claire. Stunned by his outburst, Claire didn't say another word. She simply left the home of her now former fiancé. As she drove back, she wiped away the tears that had crept down without permission. At least now I know for sure, she thought. Breaking up with Eric was the right decision. With her mind made up, Claire shifted her focus entirely, from her selfish ex to Grace and her little boy. The very next day, she decided to visit them. But first, she stopped by the grocery store, filling 4 large bags with not just food and treats, but also essentials for the home. Oh my goodness, this is so much! Grace gasped, wide-eyed as she began unpacking the bags. Claire, I feel so embarrassed. You're doing all this for us, and I have nothing to give you in return. You don't have to, Claire said with a smile. It makes me happy just knowing you two can live a little more comfortably. Come on, Grace, let's not be so formal. We're practically the same age. Grace blushed, lowered her gaze, and gave a shy nod. She never could have imagined that someone so kind and well-off would show up in her life like this out of the blue. Of course, Grace hadn't asked for any of this. She didn't want to rely on someone else's money, and she felt deeply embarrassed knowing their living expenses were now covered for nearly a month. But at the same time, no one had ever stood by her like this before. So despite her discomfort, Grace was genuinely and wholeheartedly grateful for everything Claire had done. Maybe I'll bake some jam pies for everyone, she offered with a hopeful smile. And when she glanced up at Claire, her eyes were shining with happiness. I actually graduated from culinary school with honors, Grace said with a small smile. Ben says I'm a great cook, and my husband used to say the same." Her voice softened noticeably at the mention of her husband, and Claire caught a flicker of sadness cross the young woman's pale face. Sensing it wasn't the right time to ask, Claire chose not to press. She figured Grace would open up when she was ready. As time went on, the two women began talking more and more, and Claire slowly found herself becoming part of this small, humble, but undeniably warm family. What drew Claire in was Grace's genuine nature. Her honesty and kindness felt refreshingly real. Unlike nearly all of Claire's friends from high society, Grace had none of that usual snobbery or stiff, self-important attitude. But not everyone saw it the same way. Her mother, Margaret Sinclair, was far from pleased with the situation. Since the death of her husband, she'd become especially difficult when it came to anything involving other people's wealth, or lack thereof. And this time was no exception. She made no effort to hide her disdain for Claire's new acquaintances, firmly believing they were a bad influence who would only drag her daughter down. "Claire, think about what you're doing," her mother said, clearly disapproving. "You're basically sponsoring random nobodies. It's humiliating for our entire family. I never thought I'd see the day." She shook her head with a look of disappointment. "You and people like that, you come from completely different worlds. They live the way they do for a reason. Honestly, it's their own fault. What exactly are they guilty of?" Claire asked, clearly taken aback. "For not studying hard enough. For not working hard enough. And that's why they never got anywhere," Margaret Sinclair replied coolly, as if it were obvious. "You should be surrounding yourself with people who are more like you, successful, wealthy individuals who actually value what you bring to the table," her mother said firmly. "And on top of that, you need to start looking for a new fiancé, someone you can build a business empire with, someone who'll help grow your fortune." When Margaret Sinclair pointedly looked away, Claire instantly understood what that meant. It was clear her mother still hadn't given up on her ex-fiancé, Eric, as the ideal future son-in-law. "If you're trying to bring Eric back into this conversation," Claire said flatly, "don't waste your breath. That's not happening. It's over between us. I'm never going to marry him." "Claire," her mother burst out, clearly offended. "Eric is the best match you can hope for. Are you seriously going to let some silly argument tear you two apart? You just don't get it," Claire said with a weary sigh. "He's as dull as dry toast. The only thing he cares about is money. I'm not even convinced he won't just take what he needs from me to fund that business center of his and then leave. And you think these other worthless guys are any better?" Her mother shot back, planting her hands firmly on her hips. "Today you handed them a huge amount of money. You feed them, you dress them, everything. But what happens when the money runs out? You'll all be out on the street together." "Mom," Claire said firmly, her tone serious, "you need to stop talking about them that way. They're my friends. And it looks like they've really gotten into your head," her mother said, tapping her temple with one finger. "Mom, you're hurting yourself by staying close to them, and you don't even see it." The argument dragged on a bit longer before Margaret Sinclair, clearly disheartened by her daughter, gave up, called a taxi, and headed home. "I won't sit back and watch you destroy your own life," she said at last. Claire hoped her mom would come around soon. She never stayed mad at Claire for very long. She also wished her mother would finally see that she was no longer a child and didn't need anyone telling her how to live her life. A few days later, Claire made up her mind to speak with the owner of the restaurant where Lita worked. When Charles Whitmore heard how they'd met, he seemed genuinely surprised. Well, I had no idea what she was going through," he said. "She never mentioned any of it." He paused, then added, "Don't worry, we'll sort this out somehow." Grace had never opened up to anyone at the restaurant. Quiet and diligent by nature, She didn't think it was right to burden others with her personal struggles. Grace had been holding on to the hope that she could handle everything on her own. It wasn't until the incident with Claire, when emotions got the better of her, that she finally opened up about what had been going on. True to his word, Charles Widmore soon offered her a better-paying position as a waitress. "You'll need to go through some training first," he told her. "But if you stay sharp, work hard, and show you're reliable, we'll bring you onto the main team." Grace was so overwhelmed with joy, she nearly burst into tears. Of course, Grace gladly accepted the offer. While she was getting settled, the owner made his way over to Claire, who was sipping her coffee in the main hall. After studying her thoughtfully for a moment, Charles Widmore suddenly said, "How would you feel about becoming a co-founder of a citywide charity foundation? I've been supporting it financially for the past year, and I can say with confidence that the team is doing meaningful work. They assist those in need, support struggling families, and occasionally run a public kitchen in the city square. I think you could make a real difference too," he added. Claire paused to consider it. The offer genuinely appealed to her. She'd actually been toying with the idea of supporting a similar rehabilitation center for a while now. That one focused more on single mothers, but the core mission was the same. "Thank you. I'll give it some serious thought," she said with a warm smile. They went on to discuss a few details about how she might get involved. From that day forward, what started as a casual meeting with the older businessman slowly began to grow into a meaningful friendship. The man proved to be both dependable and insightful, even offering her some useful tips on growing her boutique business. Then, one day, something happened that completely changed the way Claire saw Charles Widmore. It was a warm, sunny day, about a month after Grace had started working as a waitress. Claire was relaxing at a cafe by the river when she suddenly caught the sound of familiar male voices behind her. "How many times do I have to drill it into your thick skull that you won't find a better wife than Claire?" Charles Widmore's voice was low, but there was a sharp edge to it, an undercurrent of irritation aimed squarely at the person he was speaking to. "She's lost her mind," Eric blurted out, not caring who might be listening. "She ditched me for a bunch of lowlifes." "Then fix it," Charles Widmore shot back. "If you hadn't acted like garbage in that restaurant, none of this would have happened. And you just had to put on a show to flash your status around." Charles Widmore continued, "When I heard how you acted that day, I honestly wished you weren't my son." Claire felt a chill run down her spine. "Father, you too?" Eric's next words confirmed her suspicion. "What the hell is this?" he snapped. "Everyone thinks they can tell me how to live, how to talk, how to act. That girl's a cleaner, a servant, nothing more. It's not like anything would have happened to her. No big deal," he muttered, giving her a slight shake. "Maybe it even taught her a lesson." Eric went on, "So next time, she keeps a better eye on her kid." Claire's fingers suddenly went numb and started to tremble. She carefully tried to set her glass of juice down without dropping it, afraid it might slip and shatter. Her throat tightened, completely dry, as Charles Widmore continued scolding his rebellious son, who also happened to be her former fiancé. "This is exactly why we barely speak anymore," he said sternly. "Just look at the selfish, arrogant man you become. Or have you already forgotten what your mother's life was like before I married her? That's totally different." Eric squeaked, defensively. "Mom was a manager at a cleaning company. She'd never lower herself like that." Eric protested. "I don't want to hear it." The restaurant owner snapped, brushing his hand through the air. "Your mother was no different than the people you look down on. She was what you'd call a servant too, just one who worked in an office. Here's the deal," he continued firmly. "Either you figure out how to make things right with Claire, or I'll make sure your comfortable life comes to an end. You can count on that. I've been keeping an eye on her for a while now, and believe me, Her sharp business sense and genuine compassion are things you could stand to learn from. That's how the universe works. What you give today, you get back 3 times over tomorrow. You help those in need now, and down the line, that help comes back to you. Charles Whitmore went on. She's got more money than she knows what to do with. And instead of appreciating that, you spit in the very well that could have sustained you for a lifetime. Do you have any idea how far we could have gone, especially with me guiding you? Claire was suddenly hit with a wave of nausea. She stood up slowly from the table and drifted toward the river, hoping the fresh air would clear her head. So that's why Charles Whitmore had taken such an interest in her. He'd been planning to take control of his son's business and quietly gain access to hers as well. Claire leaned against the bridge railing, feeling its cold firmness as she stared down at the shimmering surface of the river. How could I have been so blind about them? She wondered, her thoughts fixed on her ex-fiancé's father. Meanwhile, Ben finally underwent heart surgery. The operation went smoothly, and the child was moved to the recovery ward. Dima still needed to go through a course of medication. Claire, eager to see the boy get better as soon as possible, also covered the cost of his treatment by transferring funds to the clinic. Alongside running her business, she made regular visits to the social center she had recently begun supporting as a partial sponsor. She made sure the facility had everything it needed and also took time to observe how the staff were doing their jobs. On top of that, Claire took an active role in a food drive to help feed those in need. She stood alongside the other volunteers at the food distribution station. It was during one of these events that she met Nathan. Young and good-looking, the volunteer caught her attention right away. And when she found out he was actually a seasoned paramedic working on an ambulance crew, her interest in him deepened even more. I like knowing I can help people, not just in emergencies, Nate said as he ladled soup into a bowl for someone in need. Even in everyday life, it matters to do something, no matter how small, as long as it's good, he added. Claire felt like she'd stepped into an entirely different reality, one that stood in stark contrast to the world she was used to. Here, people weren't chasing wealth. They were focused on making a difference, on simply helping where they could. The volunteers' sincerity, both in their actions and their mindset, felt so real that she started to question everything. The business world she'd been part of for so long suddenly seemed like a dazzling illusion, flashy on the outside, but hollow at its core. Nathan turned out to be a thoughtful, intelligent man, and after a few days, he asked Claire if she'd like to go out with him. She happily said yes. She was curious to learn more about him too. What started as a friendly connection slowly began to turn into something deeper, and both of them sensed that their relationship had the potential to evolve into much more. Meanwhile, Grace continued working at Charles Whitmore's restaurant. Grace had successfully finished her waitress training and was now working in the role full-time, slowly pulling herself out of poverty, with a lot of support from the people around her. One afternoon, a well-off friend came to visit, deliberately arriving near the end of Grace's shift. She had no desire to run into the restaurant's owner, especially after everything she'd recently discovered about him, so she did her best to steer clear. But to her surprise, she found Grace alone in the back room, quietly crying. When she gently asked what was wrong, Grace looked up at her with tearful eyes, filled with sorrow. "Today's the anniversary," she said, her voice breaking. "The day Danny disappeared." Through her tears, Grace explained that her husband had worked as a security guard, traveling around the country to protect industrial construction sites. The job paid well, and they had been doing okay. But 4 years ago, while on a trip with his crew to one of the excavation sites, the bus carrying Daniel and his co-workers veered off a bridge and crashed. "Straight into the river," Grace said quietly. Most of the men died on impact. The current was rough, with rapids, and Danny, along with a few others, was never found. She let out a heavy sigh. I can't even lay him to rest. There's nobody. Since then, Ben and I have just been drifting from place to place. Claire gently shook her head and gave her hand a comforting pat. She could only imagine the pain of losing someone you love and not even having a grave to visit. Gracie, try not to carry the weight of it too much, she said softly. Life does keep moving forward. Claire tried to comfort her, but just then, Grace's phone began to ring softly. She answered, and on the other end was Ben, speaking quickly, his voice filled with excitement. When Grace ended the call, her face had gone pale, white as chalk. What is it? Claire asked, her voice full of concern. Grace shook her head slowly. Ben said he just woke up after his treatment, and he told me he saw his father in a dream, she murmured, as if he were still alive. Ben said it was like, Daniel is still alive, living in some village, but has no memory of them. Claire sat down across from her friend in silence. But how could that be? She asked, her voice heavy with doubt. You think it was more than just a dream? That maybe your son is somehow trying to find his father? I don't know, Grace replied, shaking her head in confusion. She went on to explain that her husband's mother used to live in a remote village, and according to him, the locals believed she had special gifts, said she could heal with her hands, and even see the future. Maybe Ben inherited a bit of her gift, Grace said thoughtfully, though I've never seen anything like that in him before. Claire gave a small shrug. Well, maybe it was just lying dormant all this time, something that only surfaced because of the stress. Don't forget, your son just had heart surgery. Grace looked at her, with a flicker of hope in her eyes. You really think that's possible? She asked. Then maybe we should talk to him. Ask him more about the dream. See what details he remembers. Claire gave her a reassuring nod. Absolutely. I'll help you every step of the way. Just a few days after Ben shared every detail of his dream, Claire and Nathan set out to track down the village he described. Before long, they came across a small settlement full of believers. They spoke with the locals, showed them a photo of Daniel, and to their astonishment, someone recognized the face. They were directed to a man who closely matched Daniel's appearance. To their shock, they discovered that Daniel, now going by the name Thomas, had been living there all along, working quietly at the village church, mostly handling everyday chores and maintenance. You really don't remember anything from your life before this? Claire asked gently. The man, tall, broad-shouldered, and serious, just gave a quiet shake of his head, his expression heavy with sadness. There are a few blurry flashes, like fragments of a dream I can't quite hold onto, he said. Claire and Nathan managed to convince him to let them take a few photos, hoping to show them to Grace later. If she recognized him, and it turned out to be her husband, then the journey wouldn't have been for nothing. While Claire and Nathan were off searching for Daniel in the taiga, Grace was called in by Charles Widmore for a serious talk. The businessman, with his usual polished charm, strongly implied that as Claire's closest friend, she had a responsibility to knock some sense into her, specifically to convince her to get back together with Eric. And how exactly am I supposed to do that? Grace asked, throwing up her hands. I can't force her to forget him. They ended things for a reason, and it was final. Claire doesn't love him anymore. Just speak to her, woman to woman, the director pressed, clearly not ready to give up. I'm sure you'll figure out the right thing to say, he continued confidently. She's been completely manipulated by all this so-called suffering. She's given you more money than some full-scale productions get. Grace looked down, her eyes dropping shyly. The way he spoke about her friendship with Claire made her deeply uncomfortable. I never asked for any of that, she said quietly. Claire is just a genuinely kind person with a big heart. She saved my son's life. If we hadn't crossed paths when we did, I don't know if Ben would still be here." The words hit her hard, and she covered her face with her hands. But the owner quickly waved it off. "Come on now, Malachka. Tears won't get you out of this. Here's how it's going to be," he said coldly. "Either you convince Claire to get back with her real fiancé, not that broke guy from the center." Grace looked up, and the fear in her eyes was instant and unmistakable. "Or," he continued, "I won't just fire you. I'll make sure your name is dragged through the mud all over town. I'll paint you as a manipulator who conned her way into the good graces of a wealthy heiress." He leaned in slightly, his tone sharpening. "And I'll be sure to mention how you used your son to tug at her heartstrings. You even had him crawling under tables, pretending to be half dead from hunger, just to earn her sympathy. Or maybe you didn't feed him for days, just to make it more convincing," he added with a smirk. Grace stared at him, stunned. She couldn't believe he was actually serious. "Oh, yes," Charles Whitmore went on, narrowing his eyes with a cold glint. "Can you imagine what child services will say when they hear about all this?" He leaned in, voice low but firm. "I've got video footage from that unforgettable night. It clearly shows your son crawling out from under the table, looking up at Claire like he's starving, begging for food. Doesn't exactly make for a glowing parenting record, does it? One call, and they'll take Ben away in a heartbeat. He'll be in an orphanage before you can blink. You wouldn't dare." Grace shouted, her voice shaking with outrage, before storming out of the director's office and ripping off her apron on the way. "You've got 3 days," Charles Whitmore called after her, "or the whole city will know what kind of mother you really are." Terrified, Grace immediately phoned Claire and confessed everything, holding nothing back. "Don't worry," Claire said calmly. "I'll handle him as soon as I get back. And actually, I have some news of my own." Her tone was teasing, but she left it at that. "For now, quit your job and stop worrying. I'll make sure you have a good, respectable place to go." After reassuring Grace that she'd earned just as much, if not more, working with the charity foundation, and that she'd finally have peace of mind, Claire ended the call. Not long after returning to her hometown, she headed straight to Charles Whitmore's restaurant. She stormed into his office like a force of nature, eyes blazing. Standing in the doorway, she wasted no time. "I know exactly who Eric is to you," she declared. "And shame on you, blackmailing a struggling mother, using her sick child as Lenore G? That's beyond low," she said, her voice sharp with anger. "I'm never going back to your son," Claire said firmly. "And I won't let you meddle in my life any further. You're being irrational." Charles Whitmore tried to explain. "I only want what's best for you. You're the one person who could actually change him. You've got the fire, the ambition. He'd bend to your will like silk. And the two of us, working together, we could build something massive. Take it all the way to the capital." Claire simply shook her head. "It all makes sense now," she said quietly. "Now I see where Eric gets his bottomless greed," Claire added coldly. "Let me make one thing absolutely clear. If you ever try to blackmail Grace or anyone else I care about again, I'll make sure your restaurant is swarming with inspectors. Tax authorities, health services, you name it. They'll be lined up at your door. And believe me, that's a promise." With that, she turned on her heel and walked out, head held high, leaving the director stunned and speechless. Naturally, the last thing he wanted was a flood of government officials poking around, especially in a place that already had more than a few things to hide. Worried about his reputation, Charles Whitmore eventually backed off, realizing it was smarter to protect the restaurant he already had than to chase lofty dreams of building a business empire. Just a few days later, Claire received news that completely stunned her. She found out she'd been pregnant for a while without even knowing it. Still in disbelief, she went to a second clinic for confirmation. but the results were identical. "It's okay, little one. We'll figure things out together," Claire whispered, gently running her hand over her belly. "Trust me, you're better off having a different father, or none at all, than someone like Eric." She had no intention of letting her ex-fiancé find out about the pregnancy. In fact, she wanted to keep it quiet from just about everyone, worried that someone might slip up and pass the news along to him. The only person she confided in was Grace. Grace was genuinely thrilled for her friend, happy that Claire would now get to experience the joy of motherhood too. She truly believed it would be a blessing in her life. At that same time, Grace was staying in the very old Believer village where her long-lost husband had been living for the past few years. When Claire had first shown her the photos, Grace was overcome with both happiness and disbelief. Without hesitation, she booked the earliest flight and rushed to see him. Not long after she arrived, Daniel began to recognize her, especially after Grace showed him old photo albums filled with pictures of the two of them and their son. Most of Daniel's memory had returned, and he agreed to go back to the city for a proper medical evaluation and to resume a normal life with his family. When Ben found out his father was alive, he clapped his hands in excitement. "I knew it," the boy exclaimed happily, then turned to his mother and said, "Everything's going to be okay now. I dreamed about it. We were all together." Grace hugged him tightly, tears of joy streaming down her face. She never could have imagined that her son might have some mysterious, unexplainable abilities. Dealing with constant nausea and intense dizziness, Claire kept pushing back business meetings and began distancing herself from her high society circle. She even limited contact with her own mother, knowing full well that Margaret Sinclair would pressure her to go back to Eric. To her, a normal father was what a child needed, and Eric still fit that mold in her eyes. But during their last visit, Anastasia couldn't help but notice how oddly her daughter had been acting. As soon as she realized her daughter was pregnant, Claire's mother wasted no time. She immediately reached out to Eric and shared the big news. "Just so you know, I'm not letting this go," Eric said during a meeting Claire attended only because she felt pressured to. "I'm certain the baby's mine, and once it's born, I'll be demanding a paternity test. Don't even think about it." Claire shot back, her eyes locked on him with a firm, unshakable stare. "This is my baby, and you won't be a part of his life," Claire said firmly. "Oh, so you think you can use the child to work your way into my company? Not happening," Eric scoffed. "We'll see," he replied with a smug, cryptic smile, and Claire could sense how serious he was. "For your information, this child will have a real father," she shot back. "Someone who actually loves me, and someone I love too." "What? That little paramedic from the ambulance?" Eric sneered. "Please. He's nothing. Getting rid of him will be easy. He's no match for me." Things ended terribly between Claire and Eric, and before parting ways, her ex-fiancé threatened to do whatever it took to gain custody of the child. He warned that if she refused to resolve things peacefully and didn't give the baby his last name, he'd make her pay for it. That evening, overwhelmed by stress and emotion, Claire began feeling seriously unwell. She called for an ambulance, and by the time the medics arrived, she was so weak she nearly collapsed at the door. When she was brought to the hospital, the doctors were stunned by what they found. She had come dangerously close to losing the baby, and if that had happened, the consequences for her own health could have been life-threatening. Claire had lost a significant amount of blood, but thanks to the expertise of the medical team, she pulled through. While she was still recovering in the hospital, Grace came to visit. The moment she heard what had happened, her devoted friend rushed to the clinic without hesitation and waited anxiously outside the operating room. She didn't budge until the doctor finally emerged and assured her that Claire was out of danger. As soon as Nathan found out what had happened, he took to his blog and published a scathing article exposing Eric. In it, he made it crystal clear that this man had pushed the mother of his unborn child to the brink of hospitalization, all in a desperate attempt to reclaim control over Claire and her multi-million-dollar fortune. The article exploded like a bomb, spreading rapidly and catching the attention of major media outlets. Soon, reporters were calling Eric and his father nonstop, demanding comments and interviews. Before long, Eric's tarnished reputation caught up with him, and it didn't take long to reach Charles Whitmore's restaurant. Within just 2 months, the once popular establishment had gone under, completely bankrupt. With customers gone and bills piling up, the businessman had no choice but to sell the restaurant for a fraction of its value, just to pay off the mounting debts of his son. By then, Eric had fallen deep into addiction, drinking heavily and gambling away everything he and his father had built over the years. Another month quietly slipped by. Claire was finally released from the hospital and began getting ready to start a new chapter of her life with Nathan. She invited him over to her mansion to help set up one of the rooms for the baby's arrival. There was still plenty of time before the due date, of course, but Claire knew that the earlier they got started on the nursery, the smoother things would go later, especially once the responsibilities began piling up like a snowball. Nathan, ever the gentleman, took the news of Claire's pregnancy, despite it being her ex-fiancé's child, with calm understanding. By then, he had already made up his mind. He was going to marry her, no matter what. And because he loved her, he would love her child as his own. Claire felt a kind of happiness she never thought she'd experience. After the painful breakup with Eric, she'd nearly given up on the idea of finding joy as a woman, or having a loving family of her own. As Claire continued going through old belongings in the soon-to-be nursery, she unexpectedly came across a photo album she'd never seen before. Flipping through its pages, she was stunned to find a picture of her father, Richard Bennett, with his arm around a woman she didn't recognize. Someone who looked nothing like her mother. "She's pregnant too," Claire murmured, pointing to the woman's clearly visible baby bump. The stranger was beaming beside her father. "Maybe she's a distant relative of yours?" Nathan offered, trying to make sense of it, but Claire shook her head slowly. "No one in my family lives beyond Moscow," she said, "and I know all my relatives very well." "Wait, there's a date on the back," Nathan said, turning the photo over. Claire leaned in, and her stomach dropped. The picture had been taken just days before her birthday, which meant she'd been born only 3 days after that moment was captured. Could it be that her father had cheated on her mother? Was it possible she had a half-sibling out there, someone she never knew existed? What made it all even stranger was that she couldn't recall ever seeing a single photo of her mother visibly pregnant. When Claire brought it up to her mother, she brushed it off with a casual excuse, saying she hadn't looked good in photos back then, so she avoided the camera. But that explanation didn't sit right with Claire. It only made her more suspicious. She began asking her mother about the details surrounding her birth, but the response was vague at best. "Oh, nothing unusual," her mother said with a chuckle. "You were born like any other baby." Still, Claire wasn't about to let it go. Sensing that something was being kept from her, she tapped into every connection she had, at the passport office, and at the maternity hospital where she was supposedly born. What she uncovered left her completely stunned. It turned out that Claire's biological mother wasn't the woman who raised her. It was someone else entirely. And the stranger in the photo? That was her real mother. An elderly midwife remembered the woman and revealed that she had vanished from the maternity ward the day after Claire was born. No one had seen her since. Richard Bennett, overwhelmed and distraught, had taken his newborn daughter and left. And for everyone involved, that was where the story ended. Determined to uncover the truth, Claire went as far as installing hidden cameras around the house, hoping to catch any signs or clues about her real mother. Claire didn't dare tell Margaret Sinclair that she had uncovered the truth. Still, it was as if her mother could feel something had shifted. She became noticeably more distant, her warmth replaced by a cool, reserved demeanor. Then, one day, Claire found something on one of the hidden camera recordings that made her heart race. Her mother was on the phone, clearly in the middle of an argument. "She's figured it out," Anastasia said sharply. "Claire knows everything." There was also mention of money. Anastasia insisted she had paid Claire's real mother enough to ensure she would never show her face again. With Nathan's help, Claire eventually tracked down the address of her biological mother, Eleanor Rhodes. When they finally met, Eleanor's eyes filled with tears as she explained why she had vanished all those years ago. It hadn't been by accident. "I've struggled with kleptomania for most of my life," she admitted through sobs. "Back then, no one would have understood. They wouldn't have helped me. They would have judged me, maybe even locked me up." At the time, there were no real options for treatment. Just shame and silence. "How could I keep living with Rick, someone so respected and well-known, while still stealing behind his back?" Eleanor said, her voice full of regret. "And to be honest, I didn't love him all that much. I married him because I needed the money. My family was dirt poor." She went on to explain that, at the time, she had a lover who was also a thief. He was the one who convinced her to leave her husband right after the baby was born. So Eleanor walked away from her daughter, though she admitted that she deeply regretted it afterward. "But there was no way to undo what had been done," Eleanor said softly. "It was Vita, Anastasia, the maid, who helped me," she explained. "She'd been in love with your father for as long as I can remember, and she agreed to help me disappear. The only thing she asked in return was the chance to raise you as her own and become Rick's wife." Viktor Vasilyevic, unwilling to let his daughter grow up motherless, agreed. He married Margaret Sinclair soon after. Eleanor went on to say that she had moved to a nearby town, where she lived quietly with her adoptive mother. "So it was Anastasia who kept us apart all these years?" Claire cried out in disbelief, throwing her arms around her mother, as tears of joy streamed down her face. "My God, I always felt something was off between us, like we weren't really connected, but I could never put it into words." She took a deep breath, her voice filled with hope. "But now everything's going to be different. You know, there are treatment programs now, even at our own social center, that can help you overcome this disorder completely." Once the truth was fully uncovered, Claire brought her biological mother to the rehabilitation center she supported. At the same time, she slowly distanced herself from Margaret Sinclair. While Claire remained grateful for the years of care and financial support, the betrayal was something she couldn't forgive. In time, Claire gave birth to a pair of beautiful twins, and shortly after, she and Nathan tied the knot. Their marriage was a happy one, filled with love and a sense of peace. They stayed close with Grace and her family, who, after Daniel's memory had completely returned, celebrated a second wedding of their own. As for work, Grace found her passion again, this time as a chef at the cafe within the social center. Every week, she delighted the residents with new culinary creations.